Thank you, Kahirek, and thank you, Deputy Pringle, for sharing the time. I want to very much welcome the interim report and also I suppose the frank and open and positive tone that clearly was in the committee, because it's being reflected in the contributions of members of the committee here, as well as those of us just responding briefly to your work. And I want to thank you for that very, very generous work. It's a great learning, especially as a new TD, to listen to this debate as I move from what certainly was an experience of a somewhat probably more reflective chamber into this one. And I think it's very, very critical that we do move towards that strong Dáil that Deputy Murphy spoke about. I'm happy to have had the opportunity to have made a submission to the committee, and that some of the suggestions that I put forward have been taken on board in the interim report. The committee, I think, has obviously acknowledged the role or the increased role of an opposition that can play here in this 30-second Dáil, and I think that's absolutely essential if the Dáil is to accurately represent the views of the Irish people, and that has not always been the case, and we've heard other deputies reflect on that, with much power in the last Dáil centralised among a small group of decision makers. I think the inclusion also of a proposal to have an that abstaining is a voting option, perhaps, I welcome that. I think also perhaps this may be an acknowledgement of the possibility of a minority government, and that abstaining will not be seen as an act of not engaging with the legislative process, but instead an action of itself. And abstaining on key votes, I think, could soon be an act that must be carried out by members of the opposition, either by political parties or independents. And I also welcome maybe the suggestion for the opportunity to explain those abstentions. I also look forward to future recommendations brought forward by the committee, particularly in relation to financial security, especially in the budgeting process. I believe that we need to empower fully all members of the Parliament to take a meaningful role in the budgeting process, and to give us an opportunity to work towards counteracting recent regressive budgets and austerity cuts. And I certainly would bring an equality lens, an anti-poverty lens to my analysis of the budgets, and a use of an independent analysis to support these. I hope that the appetite for reform shown in the Dáil today, also, and again other deputies have spoken about this, could be reflected as an appetite and a real genuine reform in the Seanad. And I firmly believe that the will of the people ought to be implemented with a one person, one vote for the Seanad. I'm hopeful that that can be achieved, especially with many of the current Seanad candidates running on a platform for reform. And there have been Deputy Murphy and others have also referred to the issue of prayer in the Dáil. Well, we reformed that in the Seanad. Lots of debate in relation to that particular issue, so that it would reflect more a modern chamber, and ultimately our compromise was 1 minute of silence with 1 minute of a Christian prayer. The Dáil could go further than that in terms of its efforts to reform, perhaps with a couple of minutes of silence, so that everybody's ways of drawing on their ethical source or their spiritual or sense of being part of the wider community has an opportunity to be drawn on as we come to debate here in the Seanad. I think, as again, just to conclude, as many the deputies have already said, there's clearly a need to move beyond the adversarial nature of the chamber. It is I'm just so delighted to have had to participate in this and spent some time staying here, because there is a contrast between what's been going on now than I think earlier in the day. As both an optimist and a realist, I acknowledge that political reform is an ongoing process, and that the Oireachtas has a lot to fix. But I believe there's a renewed appetite, and that there have been many calls for new politics since the election. But it will only be new politics if it translates into new results. And so I look forward to the ongoing reports from this apparently very productive committee.
Very much, Deputy.